Hello, my name is Sierra, and I did my presentation on Louie Zamperini, one of America's lesser-known heroes, an Italian immigrant. Louie, along with his three siblings, were born to parents Anthony and Louise, who were Italian immigrants that had settled in New York. Anthony and Louise had moved to America as young adults, and they started a family. In 1919, when Louie was 2 years old, they moved across the country and settled in Torrance, Southern California. The Zamperini family spoke no English, and as Louie began school, he struggled. He and his family were the only Italian family in town, and they were instant outsiders. Kids bullied Louie for his accent, and he struggled to keep up in school. Years of resentment and an Italian hot temper, Louie began acting out. He smoked and drank at age 7 and earned the name Fleet Feet because he was always sprinting away from a broken window or a shop he had just robbed. Louie had problems all the way through high school, and he developed a reputation for being that troublesome Italian kid. Pictured is Louie with his big brother Pete when they had just moved to California. As a high school freshman, his big brother Pete decided it was time to rein in his wild little brother. Pete was already a track star, and he was determined to make Louie into one as well. Everyone knew he had an affinity for running. Months of training and attitude adjustments began to produce results. Louie began setting records and winning races, and suddenly Fleet Feet was becoming a positive name. Finally, the strange Italian boy was making a new name for himself in town. Torrance suddenly started realizing that they had a great runner on their hands. In 1936, at 19 years old, Louie qualified for the Berlin Olympics. He was the youngest member of the American team that year. Pictured is Louie making an incredible comeback in his race. Although he didn't win, he placed 8th overall. He had an incredible race, and nobody had ever heard of the Italian boy from Torrance, and his performance caught the eye of Hitler. Hitler requested that Louie come up to his spectator's box after his race and shook his hand, and in English, broken English, all he said was, "The man with the fast finish." It was a cool experience for Louie, and it's something that he's always remembered, meeting Hitler. By this time, Torrance had grown to love Louie and his family. When Louie came home from the Olympics, he was received with a parade and a town-wide celebration. Everybody loved their Fleet Feet Louie. A couple years later, World War II was breaking out, and Louie enlisted in the Air Force. He flew on a bomber plane, and they did countless missions with his group, and their typical plane was named the Superman. And one day, Superman was damaged too badly to fly anymore, and they were put on a plane that was notoriously known as the Lemon plane. It was called the Green Hornet. One day, Louie and his crew got sent out on a final mission somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, and their plane malfunctioned. 11 men, including Louie, went into the ocean, and only 3 of them survived. Louie, Phil, and Mac ended up on a life raft with very little food and no water, and they managed to drift for 47 days at sea. After 47 days of drifting across the Pacific Ocean, Louie and Phil were captured by the Japanese. Mac died on day 33. Louie and Phil spent years in a prisoner of war camp in Japan, all the way through the end of the war in 1945. His family had believed he was dead because his plane went down, and they were never recovered. Finally, at the end of the war, Louis made a call, and his family found out that he was alive, and he returned home to Torrance, again, welcomed home as a hero. And the following year, he married his wife, Cynthia, and they were married all the way until her death in 2001. Following the war, Louis struggled with a lot of anger and resentment towards his Japanese captors, and he struggled with nightmares and post-traumatic stress disorder. He succumbed to alcoholism and just anger, and his life was in pieces at this point. His marriage had started to crumble, and Cynthia was considering leaving him because he was absolutely uncontrollable in his anger and his resentment towards what had happened to him in the war. A couple years into this, Cynthia attended a Billy Graham crusade and became a believer. And after a good long time of begging Louis to come along and hear about forgiveness and this incredible Jesus, Louis finally caved, and he went reluctantly, but through the meeting, he really started to feel strongly about forgiveness, and he learned who God was, and at the end of that crusade, he as well accepted Christ, and pictured is Louis with Billy Graham. After that, Louis's life really turned around. His life became dedicated to Christ and this message of forgiveness. Louis has traveled all over the world and spoke to people everywhere, sharing the word and God's overwhelming forgiveness. Years later, eventually Louis was able to meet his Japanese captors face to face. He got to hug them and cry with them and tell them that he forgave them and truly put those anger and resentment and all of that to rest. And that was a huge moment in Louis's life to be able to do that. And so that's basically Louis's story in a nutshell, and why I think that he should be studied in an everyday history class is because his story is such an amazing example of survival and dedication, and it truly touches on so many points in our history of America. Everything from immigration, he grew up a bullied and tortured Italian kid in a white neighborhood, and he overcame that and made something of himself. He ran in the last Olympics before World War II, before this world spiraled into another tragic war, and he fought in that war, and he became a hero of that war, and all of that his life touches such huge aspects, and I think it's well worth studying. In a classroom, Louis's name can truly be associated with immigration, growing up during the Depression, Olympics, the war, and nowadays. So I think he's just an awesome person that needs to be told about. And from a faith standpoint, his life and his dedication and his comeback is one of the greatest examples of forgiveness and Christ's love that I personally have ever seen. Today, Louis's ministry is still thriving. Louis went home just this last July in 2014 at 97 years old. He was still attending meetings and meeting people and spreading his message of forgiveness and impacting lives everywhere. He has a book that he wrote called Devil at My Heels, telling about his entire life, and a book also came out in 2011 about his life, and that one is called Unbroken. And pictured is Louis with Angelina Jolie. Angelina Jolie has directed the movie Unbroken that is coming out on Christmas Day this year. Louis and Angelina Jolie were next door neighbors, and it's such an incredible thing to see Louis's ministry reaching into Hollywood and impacting lives. And I'm so excited to see what Louie's movie is now going to do, even past his death. But overall, he is a incredible story of survival and integrating into a new country and into a language, and also just a core of America's history. He's kind of lesser known right now, but I feel that in the next couple weeks, as this movie comes out and he becomes more prominent, that his ministry will continue to grow and stretch throughout. And his story is just an incredible example of God and his forgiveness, and you can rise above anything that has come through your life. So thank you.